Welcome to the Goblet and the Bread charcoal tutorial for today. I picked this one because I just thought it had some really interesting textures for a change, compared to a lot of the other stuff that we've been doing, which is like the doors and the walls and scenery and that sort of thing. And this is just something completely different. Also, look, it is quite a controlled type of drawing, so there is a lot of control involved in here, so it's not really a loose drawing, so to speak. But then again, you don't have to go and make it super smooth either. All right, the only thing you have to take into account when you are working on this is the fact that these shapes are very specific. So not so much the bread one, but the cup and all that. So that must be symmetrical. Basically, what I mean is each side must just match. You know what I mean? So it mustn't be skew on the one side. So if you draw a line down the middle of this, you'll see that it's perfectly symmetrical on either side. Okay. So that's the most important part about this, is you mustn't forget about that. So if you're looking at your drawing when it's done and you see it's not symmetrical, then you must fix it before you spray it, because it'll always bother you whenever you look at it, all right? And anybody else that happens to look at it as well. So that's the only part about this that's going to be relatively time consuming, to a point. The bread, of course, is going to be quite nice and easy to do. So with the bread, I'm going to make a point of making sure that we've got some nice texture in the foreground here, because look, the way that the camera took this photograph, this is very blurred, and I mean, you can't really keep that blurred. It's going to look a bit odd in the picture. So we'll stick with a bit of texture here. I did print this out a little bit lighter just so that we can actually sort of see what's going on there. All right. Okay. With this one, we're going to start, and we're going to fill in the background first, because we want to be able to almost erase this slightly into the background, because if we do this first and we try and do the background and we try and bring that background right up to the edge here, it's not going to work. We're going to end up with that weird halo effect. All right, because you know how it works. It just goes weird when you do that. Yeah. All right, so we're going to rather stick and just do the background as it is. Okay, so, all right. So we're going to start off with the powder, okay? So our charcoal dust or charcoal powder. And we're going to use our little ball as well. Okay, so our little ball made with the cotton wool and a bit of old t-shirt material. And we're going to use that to fill in this background area over here, because that'll be nice and quick. And if you have done your drawings, I have used charcoal, so I've done a tracing here, because I didn't want to try and sketch this out using the grid, because that just would have been a nightmare. And I wanted to make sure that this was accurate. So this whole thing has been done in charcoal. I put charcoal on the back of the paper. I didn't use a graphite one. So this is specifically charcoal. So if I go over it, you can see it'll actually sort of disappear slightly. So I'm just going to have to be quite careful when I do go over it, depending on what you used. If you used pencil, then you shouldn't have an issue when you go over the edges. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. So I'm going to get my charcoal dust, and I'm going to put my charcoal dust on a little bit of paper, because I find it's just easier than trying to put it on there. And okay, then you can just dab it, and it's actually quite nice then just to put it down there a little bit. Remember, I don't have the bought one. If you've got the bought one you can literally just pour over your page, and then you can rub it in, because you won't have these little rough pieces like I've got over here. Okay, so you can see I've got these rough patches over here, these rough pieces. So I'm going to sort of rub it into here, and then I'm just going to tap it to make sure I don't have any hard pieces here. And then I'm just going to start covering the surface. And just make sure your tape is nicely stuck down over there on the edges, so that the charcoal can't go underneath there. Okay. So you're going to see now when I came up against the cup over here, you can see where I'm starting to lose a little bit of my drawing. So just be very careful when you do go over. You know, I don't want to use pencil to put that down because it's not a very dark line there. You know, so this line over here isn't very dark. So I don't want to use pencil there. So just be very careful when you do go over those sections. Maybe just go back into it and then just sort of get the drawing back again. Okay, so that's important to at least have your drawing. So just check to see when you do go over that it doesn't go over by too much. All right, that it doesn't actually smudge. And that's just because I use the charcoal as the background. Okay, as the drawing, should I say. Okay. Yeah, so just, you know, I mean, it doesn't have to be all the same tonalities, obviously. I quite like the different tonalities there. This works so well. And if you want to bring that table into the background, I think I'm going to rather make my table straight. I'm not going to have the skew thing in there, okay? If you find you're getting closer to here and you're scared that you're going to go over it with this little ball, you can either use a smaller ball or you can use your paintbrush. Okay, then you've got a little bit more control and it'll give you the same effect. Do you see what I'm saying? So you can see there, that's actually a lot easier than trying to use the ball there. Just so I don't lose that picture there. Okay. Just be careful about bringing a halo around here. So just make sure that you've got your nice and, you know, it's got to be, yeah. You gotta do it very carefully that you don't lose your drawing, but you also don't want to have a halo either. Okay. So if I'm going to squint my eyes and I can see if there are any really weird patches. I'll try and remember just to bring it all the way to the edge of the bread as well, okay, because you don't want to have to go over that. Okay, I'm definitely not going to make that skew table in the background. I'm going to keep mine sort of relatively straight. So I'm going to just quickly clean up where the cup is over here, just so I don't lose. I'm so scared I'm going to lose that line there, so I'm going to do that just to the edge there. And then I'm just going to use the needle eraser to bring in those little circles there, because I really like that. It's called a bokeh, by the way, if you're wondering what these little circles over here are called bokehs. It's actually a photographic term, and it's B-O-K-E-H, bokeh. Okay, so I'm going to use my needle eraser, and I'm going to just very gently put in those circles there. I mean, you can change your circles to where you want them, obviously, as well. Just make sure they are circular, and I'm just going softly. I don't want to make them too light initially. Maybe you can make them a little bit lighter later on if you want. Just try and get a sort of a nice circle. Because remember, it doesn't have a very sharp edge to it. You can see it's very soft, eh? So it hasn't got a sharp edge. That's why I'm using the needle eraser and I'm not using a hard eraser, because I want to try and keep it nice and soft. And I'm going to move some of the circles. I don't want that one right on the edge of the paper there, so I'm going to move that. Okay, so there we go. And you know what's nice is you can put a few more in if you want to. So if you feel that's too few, then you can actually put a few more in. But maybe do that afterwards, just when you see, you know. Okay. Just remember as well, because you now have put your willow charcoal down here, you can't exactly erase. So if you're going to be leaning anywhere on here, which you are going to be doing, then I would suggest that you put a piece of paper down just to make sure that you don't mess it up. Okay. So I'm going to start off with the bread because it's nice and easy. You'll see on the bread here, it doesn't have any texture at all over here, but I'm going to bring a little bit of texture in because it's going to look very strange if it's just this like white. Okay, so I'm going to bring a little bit of texture in there. And then I'm going to do the darker area, I'm going to do with willow charcoal. Okay, so the base of it. I'm going to put willow charcoal directly onto here. And then we're going to sort of work into the willow charcoal. And we're going to use a blending stump. Get some texture in there, the eraser as well. Okay. Just remember as well, as I've always said with regards to textures, remember this is, yeah, when you look at bread, it's kind of got like round textures. You know, there's no lines on it or anything. So I always use the charcoal in such a way. Oh. Okay, so you can see there I've done this sort of darker section over here, but I haven't like made it completely pitch black, you know. So okay.
I think mine is too dark.
Okay, but you can go back into it with your eraser if you need to. Yeah. Okay, so here again, I'm gonna, you know, I'm trying to sort of get the feeling of the crustiness on the bread by using the charcoal and using the quality of the charcoal. So I'm sort of just touching here and there, just trying to get it as quickly as possible. I don't want to have to spend too much time on the bread because you don't really need to with this bread. And remember, we're going to try and keep some of the texture here as well. So that will be a big thing, is, you know, you're going to be inclined to try and copy what you see. And let's try and sort of steer away from making it too smooth in the foreground there. I always say, just think about what it is you're drawing. Don't just copy what you see. You know, think about what it is you're actually busy creating. You know, that's why I think it's important to actually draw from life as well. Because if you draw from life, you know, you're much more aware of the texture of the object.
Yeah.
So say for instance, where I want it a bit lighter here, I'm just going to use my eraser just to get that nice sort of texture in. So I'm just tapping and dabbing as well here. I'm not making lines. I'm literally just, you can actually almost, you know, dab onto it and then also just like almost scratch. You want to sort of scratch some of this rough texture into the bread here. And I mean, look at that. Check how nice that looks already. Just by using the hard eraser. Hey? Very effective. Yeah, so I'm just looking at it and I'm sort of at least getting the idea of the tonalities. For me, that's the important part here, is to get the right tonalities in the right place. So I use the side of it, I use the tip of it, and this is quite a nice little shaped one. You can see it's almost like a triangle. So then I've sort of got like lots of points that I can use, and then I've also got a sort of a flat surface that I can use as well. So I always find this is quite a nice shape to work with, depending on your fingers and how your fingers handle things like that as well. Okay, so what I've done is, can you see that edge, the top edge over there? I haven't made it smooth like in the picture there. It's actually quite smooth. I've actually made it sort of rough so that I've already got a little bit more texture going over there. And then what I'm going to do there is I'm going to use a blending stump, and I'm just going to bring a little bit of texture into that because I don't want it to be too dark. You know, I don't want the same darkness as here, but I'm going to bring a little bit of texture. I'm just going to use the blending stump to I picked up a little bit of charcoal, okay, from the charcoal dust, and I just want to get a little bit of thing. I still want to keep it light because that's where the light is coming from, so I don't want to make it any darker than anywhere else, but I do want to just add a little bit of texture. Also, the way I printed this picture out is quite I printed out a little bit lighter so that I could see what was going on at the bottom over here. So in the original, it actually isn't quite so light. But still, I know that top section, there isn't actually any detail in it at all. So yeah, just to get that bread, that sort of nice feel. Okay, and then this crusty part over here, I want to try and keep that nice and sharp. If you look at that crust, it's actually it's got a very sharp sort of edge. So I'm going to try and get those nice sharp little pieces there. Can you see where I'm making it quite dark over here? You can just look up quickly.
Yes.
So just that section over there, I'm going to try and keep that nice and dark. I'm using a smallish piece of charcoal, and I'm going to give it a nice sharp edge so that it's got that. Can you see it immediately looks sharper? It looks crusty. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same around here. So I know it isn't hard here because it's the way that the camera has taken the photograph, but I want this to be also crusty. So I'm going to bring in some sort of harder edges over here as well. So just using a small piece and then making some of these edges a little bit sharper. If you want to leave it more blurred, that's also fine. You don't have to do it like this. That's fine. And I'm going to try and make it quite dark. Remember, when you do spray though, it will go a little bit darker anyway. So I can see now it's getting a little bit more of a texture. What I like about this one is you've got this two totally different textures. You've got this very crusty sort of bread, and then you've got this wonderful smooth goblet. Okay, so the section I did have here is I initially put down a little bit of dust with the paintbrush, and then I actually took a blending stump, and then I just sort of basically pushed it into the paper a little bit, you know, just to try and get that shadow underneath there. And there's this shadow over here. It must actually come all the way up to the actual bread itself, all right? So it mustn't just stop, because remember, it's the bread is actually creating that shadow there. So just make sure that one little piece over there, there's definitely a specific sort of shadow there. Okay. So that must be very careful. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and I'm just trying to keep that very dark piece right at the bottom. You can see that what we call the occlusion shadow. You know, it's that area that gets completely pitch black. It's the part where there is no light. Okay, where the two pieces touch. So you can't really see it too well in the drawing, or in the photograph, should I say. So I am sort of keeping it relatively. That should be fine. If I need to go back into it and make it slightly darker underneath there, I will. Maybe actually just a touch. So it's almost sort of where the bread touches the ground there, or the table. Can you see? It sort of like almost blends slightly into the table. Otherwise it looks like it's sort of like stuck on. Okay, so now we're going to start off with the cup. So we've got all that down. So we're going to start with the cup, which is going to probably take a little bit more time. But that's fine. I'd rather spend more time on that and really make it look good, you know. So I'm going to use a piece of paper just to lean on, because I don't want to mess that up. You know, you could have left that blank, but oh, you know what, then you've got to try and go back into it again, and for me it doesn't work. So it's just better to rather put that in and get it over and done with, and then just use a piece of paper to lean on. Okay, all right. So what we're going to use here, so here you need a lot more sort of control. Okay, so I'm going to be using a blending stump to do a lot of this work. All right. So maybe putting a bit of charcoal down, then using a bit of a blending stump and a bit of eraser as well, just for the darker sections. But for these lighter sections over here, I'm going to be using the blending stump, because I've got a lot more control with the blending stump. Right, so I'm going to use a blending stump, and what I did today was I got a nice new blending stump. This is quite a nice small one. The reason is because it's got a nice sharp new edge to it. Okay, so if you have got one of your older blending stumps, remember you can, you know, use a bit of maybe you can use a bit of sandpaper to actually sharpen the edge. Okay, so if you need to make it a bit sharper, but I'm going to use a smaller one because it just gives me a bit more control. Okay, and I'm going to use a bit of charcoal as well, so I'm going to keep a bit of charcoal on hand. So for the lighter areas, I'm just going to work into the charcoal with the blending stump itself, like that. And I always find then when you've got this piece of paper, you can actually check to see how dark it is. Can you see there? So that's actually a perfect practice piece before you go into it. Okay, and now you can start bringing in those nice sort of shapes that you see. And this gives you a fair amount of control. So I'm going to use both sides. I'll use the one to sort of put the colour down, and then the other one to bring it in there. So I'm going to be looking at my cup carefully to see where all the shadows are. Remember, they don't have to be absolutely exact. As long as I like the shapes in here, but what I mean is you don't have to have the exact same marks there, as long as they sort of follow the general sort of idea. Okay. And what's nice is you just pick up a little bit of your charcoal. Stop glowing. And now I'm just going to look at each section, and then I'm going to sort of try and copy what I sort of see. Remember, you can use your eraser to go back into it as well. That's why when you do your drawing, you must at least have your main sort of shapes that you see there. Okay, otherwise you'll lose that. So for this bigger section over here, this is quite a large sort of section. You can also just go into your willow dust as well. You'll get a little bit down there. So if you want a bigger area that you want to work into, then you can just test it first, see if it's going to work, and go into it. Okay, so you can see I did that whole section now just with the blending stump, and now I'm just taking a bit of charcoal, willow charcoal directly, just to put in some sort of darker areas, and then I'm going to go back into it with the blending stump. So I'm just trying to get this piece to look quite nice, just to sort of give it an idea of what I'm looking for. So this sort of gets me into this whole part of the glass, you know, the goblet, I mean. I need to squint my eyes occasionally as well, because I do tend to get a little bit caught up, to make sure it actually is looking about right. Just remember, this top edge over here must be level. Okay, you'll see that it has got a specific straightness to it. All right, so just make sure you don't make it skew or anything. And then I just sort of squint to see if I'm getting the sort of right idea. Remember, you can go back into it with your sharp eraser, or if you want to, you can also use this eraser pencil as well. So like for instance, if I want to bring a very white line there, actually hang on, let me just first make that a bit grayer, so that's not that dark. So if you lose some of the white parts, then you can sort of relatively bring them back with an eraser. Remember, you are using your blending stump, so it won't necessarily be that easy to erase. But this is actually not working too badly. There we go. So you can see I'm starting to bring in those funny little sort of highlights that I see there. It's actually not highlights, actually reflections. So I'm just bringing in the reflections that I see. Just using this pencil actually works quite nicely. Also, you can control it a little bit more. Only thing is, it doesn't have a very, very sharp point. I can't get this to a very sharp point. It's not one of those ones that I can do that. It's got a relatively sort of rough texture to it. So if I want a very sharp point, then I have to try and cut a piece of my hardy razor to do that. What I'm trying to do is here, I'm sort of looking at each individual shape, and then I'm just working on that shape and doing that shape, and then I'm going to move on to the next shape. So I'm not looking at it as a whole. I'm literally working with each individual little sort of abstract shape that I see there. Okay. And then you'll find it's a lot easier because you're not really too stressed about the rest of the picture. You sort of just, you're looking at each little individual section and working on that little piece, and then you move on to the next one. And then it doesn't feel like like a huge project if you work at this part of it like that. Okay. It's not like the bread where it's a totally different sort of thing. just looking at the abstract sort of feeling of it, you know. So yeah, I just feel that's why I'm sort of working with the abstract shapes more so than anything else, you know. Sort of making sure that they do sort of follow. They have got a certain obviously shape, like for instance, like that abstract shape at the bottom, you know, it does sort of go around because it is sort of following the glass, you know. And if you actually look carefully, you'll see there is actually a section over here that isn't as white as the edge, you know, so that you could bring in with a bit of charcoal dust if you want to, just to bring in that slight sort of variation of tonality. I also made my picture quite a lot lighter, so I'm going to maybe just bring
I'll remember that for the future. That's clever.
yeah. Well, there is a little bit of a sort of a shadow over here that I can actually see if I actually look at my phone. The printout doesn't really show, but then I was looking at the printout now and I thought there is definitely something there. So it has actually got a bit of a shadow. Otherwise it's like too white almost there, you know. All right, so we're going to basically carry on with the cup after our break now. I hope that when you've come back to your pictures, you sort of see them with a bit of a fresh light, or I don't know if you actually went away completely, but yeah, it was nice for me to come back and actually see it, you know, with fresh eyes. Okay, so the biggest thing as well is with this particular goblet as well, you can see how sharp these edges are. Can you see this? It's got very nice, sharp, very sharp edges. So it's very important to have that in your picture to give it that sense of that steel, you know, it's made from steel or silver. And that's why it's very important to have these shadows behind, you know, your background that must come up right up to the cup. Okay, otherwise you're not going to get that very sharp sensation or the very sharp edges. Okay, so going to carry on again just using the blending stump and the erasers. Yeah, so you can just basically just carry on as you see what you see in front of you. So again, I'm just sticking to not looking at the thing as a whole. I'm looking at each little section, which is nice and abstract, and then that just helps me to actually just judge it a little bit better. That's why when I did the sketch as well, I just made sure I had all those sort of shapes in the right place, you know, because if you don't have them in the right place, it is going to look a bit odd. Okay, so you can see I lost my drawing over there. So now I'm going to have to be very careful, make sure that I get the right shape. Okay, so it is basically a repeat of that side over there. Just make sure I don't make a mistake here. What you can do here, if you find that this is too many angles going on here, you can change it more into sort of a roundish object. You understand what I'm saying? So then you can actually simplify it instead of having all of these little shadows in. Okay. All right. So then you can just simplify it a bit. If you really feel it's a bit too much, especially if you've got the coarser paper. It might just be a little bit too fine a sort of detail to get the shapes right, you know. Yeah, then rather don't try that, because then it might just drive you nuts, and then eventually you just get irritated. So this darker patch here, I'm just going to do a little bit darker initially. It's just easier than trying to put it all down with the actual blending stump. So then I'm actually just putting down dark initially, and then just putting it.
Yep.
Okay, so you'll see I'm basically just going in, and sort of just frittling with some of the textures. So I've sort of brought the greys in where I sort of see them, and then I'm actually now going to squint my eyes, especially this bottom section here, and just sort of squint my eyes and maybe put in some little darker pieces here and there. I just wanted to show you this one. You see this corner over here? You see this section of the cup? It's got this weird thing over here. I left that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I did the drawing, I just made it come down and came down on either side there because that's just didn't look right to me. So I left it out. Okay. Artistic license.
This can actually happen. Not a sure thing, but it can happen.
But it can happen, yeah. No, look, I know that it can be a shock to the system that can actually trigger the diabetes, so
Yes.
I'm going to work at the bottom over here, just the ground. So this back piece over here, I'm going to leave sort of soft. Can you see that line there that I've got there? I'm going to leave that soft. I'm not going to make a very specific line. So I like this little section over here. So I'm going to keep that soft on that side as well. And then I'm just going to bring in the little bit of shadow underneath the cup because it definitely has a bit of a tonality to it. So it's just not just plain white. So I'm going to soften this with the eraser. I'm definitely going to make, I think I'm going to make this a little bit darker over here. So, because my printout and my reference is quite different. You know, the reference has got quite dark areas, especially where, you know, if I look at this reference here, this is a lot darker, if you know what I'm saying. And my printout is a lot lighter. So I think I'm going to make some of these sections a little bit darker, because then for me it just stands out. It's almost like the cup doesn't stand out enough. Okay, so I'm already happy with that now. You can see just by putting in those slightly darker shadows there, it's just made this cup pop a bit more. It was just not quite dark enough, so it's definitely making a difference by adding some of those darker patches to it. It already for me looks a lot better, my cup, now that I've actually made those pieces a little bit darker, you know. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in a few more dark little patches there, using my phone as a reference and not the photograph, because the photograph I printed wasn't very dark, so or not dark enough for my liking at any rate. Yeah, so I'm just going to bring in some of those little dark patches that I see, just enhance it a little bit, and I think that will actually just make it pop, which is what I'm looking for. If you want to bring some more of those little light circles, or what we call bokeh, in the background, you can bring a few more of those in, or if you just want to leave it as it is, it's also fine. But I think I'm going to leave that as it is. Where's my paintbrush there? Just make sure that they are circular though, okay. Mustn't have any funny shapes. Just make sure everything looks like it's symmetrical, that there's nothing funny shaped or anything like that. Okay. All right, so I think I'm very happy with that. What I'll do is I'll give it a break, as I normally do, and just check to make sure that there's nothing that bothers me. You can also take a photograph of it and look at it on your phone. That often helps you pick out any problems that you may not have seen before when you actually look at it so closely. Otherwise, put it up on an easel and just walk past it every now and again, and if you see any problems, you'll pick them up immediately. Okay, I shall post the photograph at the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the lesson today. Cheers, guys.